every time we add new technology to how we run clinical trials, everybody thinks it's going to make it cheaper, but instead it makes it a little bit more expensive, but it allows you to do so much more that's complex, deeper science, more meaningful. It's like it just comes down to good product management. Is there a business case?
Welcome to Product Side Stories, the podcast where we reveal the very real and raw lessons learned from product leaders and thinkers all over the world. I'm your host, Rena Lexon, CEO of Product Side. Let's dive into today's episode. And I'm excited to have Ann Pelz join us today. Ann has a pretty great career working as the Vice President of Product Management at companies such as Sitel, Oracle, and now leading the team at One. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much, Rena. It's great to be here.
So, Ann, I love to ask this question to everybody I interview because I seem to get a different answer every time. How did you get into product management and why?
Let me see. Long time ago, I was working for a startup that did water purification technology. They ran out of money, and I was looking for my next adventure. And my dear friend Janet was working at a company called Charles River Analytics, and they needed somebody to do product management. I'd never heard of it. And she got me an interview, and I got a job. And I took the pragmatic marketing course, and there I was, learning how to do product management after, a short career as a mechanical engineer and marketing director at a startup. So, yeah.
But then you stayed in the field. Now, I have not heard your story before. The water purification, Charles River, pretty technical, physical products. Why did you stay in this field? What excites you about product management?
Well, I love the range of things that you can get your fingers into. I'm an engineer from the start of my career, and that's sort of one of my happy places. So I really enjoy interacting with engineering teams and, working on, building new things that people can use. But I also like understanding what customers need, what users need, and being able to translate that back and forth. And that, collaboration and translation is something that I really enjoy, even within teams, listening to, say, a statistician who's, a PhD level scientist, translating, what they're saying about what they need a product to do to the architect and the UX person in the room. That kind of collaboration is just an enormous amount of fun.
I find that when I talk to people who work in industries like yours, and we're going to dive into what One does shortly, it definitely helps to have a more of that engineering background. You still want to have a really good handle on empathy, right? How to have empathy with people, how to talk to people, do the market research, the creative part of product management. But I do think that having a background like yours, where you can also then translate with the engineering staff and development team, it really helps in your field. Why don't, for our listeners who may not be familiar with your company, why don't you share a little bit about what One does?
Yeah, so we provide a couple of different products and services. One of them is electronic medical records data. We have partners who transfer data to us. We use artificial intelligence to clean and de-identify it, and also enrich it to enhance the variables that are available. And then we cut data sets for pharmaceutical life sciences companies to be able to do research to understand their market, and also to provide information for payers about how treatments are being used and how they could be better used. We also have a team that does artificial intelligence models for identifying patients who have conditions that have a long journey from symptoms to diagnosis. Now, that could be, you might automatically think, rare disease, but it's also conditions like treatment-resistant depression, which doesn't yet have a clinical definition, but yet we're able to generate models that can identify patients who haven't been diagnosed with it yet and should be screened for it.
Yeah, so when I first spoke to you and I learned about some of the work that your company was doing, I thought it was a fascinating, truly fascinating application of artificial intelligence in the health and I want to call it wellness space. Although, as you already mentioned, you do sell to insurance and payers and clinics, there is also this really good application for the individual, right? For the person who, and I'm sure all of us have either in our families or our friends who have struggled with finding a true diagnosis for themselves.
Yeah.
And having, I mean, it just makes sense of there's just so many different parameters to analyze, having AI do some of this analysis for us and even in many ways do predictive analysis. It just makes sense as an application.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting about this area is, it's both interesting and a challenge. We actually don't sell to payers like insurance companies or the
Oh, you
healthcare.
don't?
Right. Our major customers are life science companies who are interested in providing tools for clinicians to be able to understand how best to treat their patients, and who might be a good candidate for a treatment and who might be a candidate for another kind of treatment. For example, we have a model that's used for helping patients who are candidates for joint replacement, knee replacement, hip replacement, understand if they're a good candidate for surgery or not. And one of the things that we provide is what we call clinical explainability. So the AI model isn't a black box. It provides additional information. You're not a great candidate for surgery, and here are the reasons why. And if you change these couple of things, in the next 6 months, you could become a better candidate for surgery. And it's part of the reason why I joined the company is that there's this chance for really reducing, the journey from symptoms to treatment, particularly for rare disease, which can be, sometimes, life changing. You really want to be able to, help providers understand how to find those patients, right? Yeah.
So, how do patients then get the benefit of being part of your model?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that, where our models are generally funded by life science companies when it comes to, sort of the at the bedside application. So we're just in the early days of, building the relationships with provider groups and payers to establish that broader adoption that would really help us. Yeah.
Yeah, because my understanding with the, clinical research organizations, I mean, they're really in the business of finding the right populations to study. And
Mhm.
so that's where my mind went to, I mean, who funds clinical research organizations? I mean, it's a huge market, right? Healthcare in the US. But it's interesting to me that then so you're not targeting payers, but that could be a growth avenue for you.
Exactly. And then, one of the other applications is exactly as you mentioned, is we do have the same phenotype, digital phenotype models that can that,
Oh,
could
no, no,
be.
no, no. Hold on. What is
Yeah, yeah.
this? Let's go that deep.
Yeah. So essentially, what our models do is they uh, prepare what we call digital phenotypes, and it's a phenotype of a patient, say, who doesn't have the condition, a phenotype of the patient who is diagnosed, and we can those are easy to identify because they already have the diagnosis, and then finding the patients who have the digital phenotype that matches the diagnosed patients but aren't yet diagnosed or are underdiagnosed.
What is a phenotype?
So that's at least a digital phenotype is sort of the collection of information from EHRs, labs. It may even be questionnaires that the patient has filled out, variables that we might estimate from all of that information. And get a big picture of the patient and who they are and what their condition is. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question, and you are not anticipating this question, so we'll see. But one of the ways I think a lot of, I would say, retail consumers like myself
Yeah.
have potentially interacted with data around my, I don't know, I don't know if I would call my profile
Mhm.
was with companies like 23andMe, where
Yeah.
they do DNA decoding. And recently, those companies, I would say, got into quite a bit of trouble because their data got hacked.
Yeah.
So I think as a company that's in analytics with an AI model, a highly regulated industry like healthcare, how do you build, I want to say, like, trust with the end user like myself that this is something that is to my benefit to participate in?
Yeah, I do think similar to the way that people participate in clinical trials, right? There's an interest in, I had a chance to talk to a patient who was participating in a rhinitis study, allergy study. And I said, why are you doing this? It's a lot of time and trouble. And the particular treatment that they were studying was, a fairly painful procedure, and there wasn't a guarantee that it worked. And his answer was, well, number one, I'm so desperate for a treatment that might work. I really hope that this does. And if it doesn't, I know that I'm contributing to
Mhm.
the development that might of a treatment that might work in the future. So it's like if we eliminate this, we might learn something, move on to the next, and develop that. So there's a bit of an altruistic piece of it. So if you're participating and your data's helping establish these models, um, there's a chance that it will help lots of people, um, and it will potentially help you. I mean, a lot of us, I think, have gone through an experience of you know having an uncomfortable or painful, frustrating, embarrassing, potentially life-threatening condition that takes a long time to diagnose. And the chance to be able to shorten that path is just so meaningful. It's meaningful to me to be participating and to be able to be working on the technology.
But I would imagine that for this data set to work, you also need a huge control group, essentially. Like you were talking about a digital phenotype for people
Yeah,
who are not diagnosed with that condition.
correct.
So, how do you get that kind of data from
Right.
people?
Well, it's from the population that we have, in the
Mm,
records. So it's like you have a mix of people. You don't have just, it's like you have, several, several 100 million patients that you're accessing the records to, right? Yeah,
I see. So that is actually, so you get that through the relationships with the providers, essentially. So
exactly.
you're going to get all of that data, and then you can create these digital phenotypes. Okay, that definitely makes sense. So, and I recently came across several reports. I think one was by Gartner of all of these companies, enterprises, just
Yeah.
in general, wanting to find use cases for AI. And many of them really don't cite very high return on investment.
Yeah.
Similar to other types of projects, I'll call them projects,
Right.
uh, there's a pretty high failure rate on seeing an actual return on their use case.
Yeah.
And healthcare, I mean, you're talking about one, predictive analytics, needing great data sets, and then having true ROI from the perspective of, okay, maybe payers in the future, but definitely individuals and the life sciences companies today.
Mhm.
Uh, how would you, I mean, this is a clear cut use case. For those companies who are trying to find value, what advice do you have for them in terms of how do they actually create AI projects that have a credible and commercial use case?
Yeah, I mean, just like any technology, each type of artificial intelligence tool set, approaches, is useful in different situations. And so you don't necessarily want to use, if you're familiar with generative AI, the Chat GPT and other tools like it, um, it's not useful in every single situation. Um, so you want to take a look at what is it that it allows you to do, and what is it that allows you to do maybe faster or maybe in a more complex way. So it's like, somebody that I worked with a number of years ago joked that every time we add new technology to how we run clinical trials, everybody thinks it's going to make it cheaper, but instead it makes it a little bit more expensive, but it allows you to do so much more that's complex, deeper science, more meaningful. So I think that's a sort of a across the board something that you see. Introduce new technology. It's not necessarily going to make it cheaper all the time, but what you can do is much more powerful. So, I think we were joking about this earlier, right? It's like it just comes down to good product management. Is there a business case? Try to get a reasonably good understanding of how much it's going to cost you to implement. Not down to the penny, maybe on the order of magnitude level. Is it $10,000 or $100,000? And what does our return look like? Is it a $10,000, somewhere between those two? So you don't, what you'd rather see is, our return looks like it's on the high side, closer to the $100,000, and the cost looks like it's closer to $10,000. Okay, maybe that's going to make sense. So, rather than just sort of like excitedly turning it on everywhere without thinking about, like how does it work, right?
Yeah, I also find that, first of all, I completely agree with you. You really need to apply product management to this problem around what is the problem we're trying to solve? Is it even the right solution? In some cases, it's an extremely expensive solution in terms of the power, the credits, or what have you, to come up with the answer that you might have a cheaper way to do it, a cheaper, more efficient way. You don't need all of the AI to do it for you. There's also this other concept where I think back in the, I don't know, 10 years ago, everybody wanted an app because suddenly that was the hot thing. Maybe it was already 15 years ago. But what they seem to have forgotten is the maintenance costs and the constant iteration. So every year, Apple would come out with a new operating system. Android came out with a new operating system. So at some point, you'd have to deprecate whatever you were building, build the next thing. And I think it's dual fold with AI, especially generative AI, where we're seeing the incredible rapid change of the platforms. So whatever you're building today, you also have to think about how can that whole solution set possibly change 6 months from now,
Right.
or a year from now. And it's more than just like the platform has changed, it's the whole solution set now has changed.
Exactly. And also making sure that you have a team that has the right skills for, number one, implementing it, doing the original proof of concepts in the first place, and then, being able to add features and do the maintenance as you keep going. Because, data scientists aren't, uh, super common, right? So you want to be able to find those folks and have them help you out.
Okay, let's talk team building then, since you're a product leader and you've built a number of different teams at different organizations. So similar to how the technology is changing, you're right, the skill set also changes. So what do you look for when you're growing your team? And if you don't have that skill set, how do you build it?
Oh, I love it. So when I'm interviewing, I look for three things. I look for diplomacy, I look for prioritization, and I look for communication. I've got two behavioral interview questions that I always ask. One is, tell me about a time when you had a lot of features. Maybe the CEO told you you had some features you needed to build. You had sales screaming about features. You had been talking to customers and you heard about, their problems. A long list of features, and you had limited time, limited resources. You couldn't build them all. When does that not happen? Anyway, so usually a good laugh. And then, so what did you do? What was the situation? What did you do? What happened? And as I'm listening to the response, what I'm listening for is, how did you make the decision on what came first, what came next, what wasn't done, and how did you communicate about it? I'm listening for, did you listen to users and buyers? Did you, chat with them, do some user observation? Did you have data about what they were doing? I'm also listening for business acumen. Not necessarily, oh, I calculated a business case down to the penny. More, we had a good sense that we had lost a couple of deals. Customers were asking for this thing. And, it was only going to take us, 2 engineers for a quarter, and the deal size was about this. So it made sense, right? It wasn't some like, a spreadsheet that took you 3 years to build. And I'm also at the end of it, I'm looking to see how did people feel at the end of the process, right? When you set the cut line, how did people react? When you said this is going to be in, that's out. How did you communicate it? How did they feel? And then at the end, when the release came out, did you feel proud? Did the company feel proud? And there's always going to be tension. And I'm listening for like, how did you handle that?
Mhm.
Another question that I like to ask is, tell me about a time when you disagreed with a direction that your chain of command asked you to follow. Because that often happens. You may have a lot of data because you're right in there, and information as well in there in the day-to-day, working with the engineers, listening to the customers. And your chain of command may have a completely different picture of where they want to go and sort of what the strategy is that they're trying to achieve. And they don't always have the time to explain why, right? Yes, good leaders should explain why in a way that you can kind of understand. But sometimes you're just going to disagree and you have to say yes, right? And so I'm looking to hear, like, is there a maturity and diplomacy, business acumen in the way that people handle those situations as well? And sometimes the right answer is I stood up and I gave them some information and they changed their mind. That is not an automatic right answer, though. It's like I stood up and I told them that they were a bunch of jerks. Well, okay.
Just to your point around product managers, I really like the concept of them needing diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
Because we talk about the importance of stakeholder management, all of that, but
Yeah.
I haven't heard diplomacy be the word used here, and I really like that. I think it talks a lot about the negotiation aspect of
Yeah.
stakeholder management,
Yeah.
as well as the communication that you have to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
But interesting. So even though you're hiring for a field that is very much around an AI application, you're still
Yeah.
very much looking for core product management skills. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. In a lot of cases, right, the industry that I'm in is small enough that, sometimes your recruiters will find like the perfect person who's got that combination of domain expertise and great product management chops and experience and just sort of the demeanor that you kind of hope people would have. But I think more often I'm looking for, I'm not necessarily going to be able to teach you the soft skills, right? The communication skills, but I can probably teach you, or the people around you can teach you a lot about the domain. Um, and the other thing is like that this particular industry, every niche you move into has great scientific and technical depth to learn about, which is one of the things I love about the industry. It's like, going from patient diaries to medical imaging systems, to, statistical design for clinical trials to real world data, real world evidence, and AI. It's like so much to learn in each of those areas. It's, wonderful. It's a plug for, software for clinical trials and real world data.
And you, at the heart of it, you have also a very mission driven culture, right? At
Yeah.
the end of the day, not every product manager out there can say that they actually changed somebody's life. And that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, I earlier in my career, I did discover that I don't particularly like working on research projects, right? It's like I worked at a company that, that did very early research for the Defense Department. It was, funny enough, computer vision and AI and decision support systems, but not a lot of products. And I found that personally very frustrating. It's like I realized I really like to work on products that people put their hands on and that they pay their hard-earned money. They value it enough that they pay their hard-earned money for. Um, so yes, right. Working for a for-profit company is something that is a mission that's important to me. But it's not the thing that helps me get really happy, be really happy. It's like I like working on products that have the chance to make a difference, right? So that's, like, how can you argue with that? That's wonderful.
Well, I feel like we agree there, right? It's it makes work, because work, especially product work, is so hard,
Yes.
and you have to deal with a lot of people. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, you really need to believe in what you're building.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm going to then turn your own interview questions on you. Oh,
Ah.
didn't do this one, didn't see this one coming, did you?
No.
Um, so, I mean, because I hear this a lot, right? I
Yeah,
hear both of these a lot. I really like them. So I'm going to ask you just one of them. And
for
that's
sure.
the second one. And that is, you know, when you have, if you're comfortable sharing, disagreed with the chain of command, how do you approach it? What do you do? Because it's so, I hear it all the time, especially, I want to say in the last 2 years, when I talk to product leaders, uh, one of the biggest tension points has been the C suite or the CEO and the head VP or even sometimes the CPO in a complete disagreement on how to run product.
Yeah.
Uh, especially, and again, I come from the perspective of there are different ways to do product management,
Yeah.
and it depends on the business model. If it's B2B, very sales driven culture, there's a way to do product that's much more delivery focused versus innovation focused, right? So there's different ways to do it, and I do not prescribe the same as some product management, I would say, thought leaders out there, where you must do it one way, because that's
Right.
not the reality. There,
Right.
product management there are best practices, and there's a spectrum on which product management can be super successful in any company. But it does require tension, no
Yeah.
matter what. At the end of the day, you're trying to make really high quality decisions.
Right.
And as a product leader, that tension can sometimes be very challenging because of who you have the tension with. That's why I want to ask you that question of how
And
do you how do you disagree?
I've as you've been chatting, I've been thinking through, what's a good story, and whenever you're in one of these situations, right? There's sometimes it's clear cut, but often it's not, right? Because there's plenty of other factors, and sometimes, with product management, you're you're making a bet, right? With you say, uh, this particular feature is the most important one that we should invest in now. Um, it's like, are you 100% sure that it's going to turn out the way that you expect, and maybe not. Um, so the story that comes to mind is, I was working at a company that had decided to rebuild all of their products, and they had, like many companies that have B2B platforms, um, they had acquired a
Mhm.
lot of companies to, build their platform, and they were continuing to maintain these disparate technologies. And they had said, all right, we're going to rebuild all of them in a unified platform. And they had rebuilt two of them, and the project was going a lot slower than they expected. And everybody was saying, "Hey, Anne, when are we going to start rebuilding, our third biggest product?" It's like a third of, I think it's something like a third of the company's or that department's revenue.
Wow.
Right. And, as you probably know, right, rebuilding a product, it takes a long time. It's a huge investment. And whenever you do the first release, it's never all of the features, right? And so nobody's happy with it, right? Because management's not happy with it because you invested all this money. Customers aren't happy with it because it
Because they
doesn't get
prefer the
better.
old one. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's like a lose-lose.
Right. And, and I'll give credit to my boss, who I really admired, and also give credit to one of my direct reports, who is the director on that product. He he identified that one of our customers said, "This is the most fully functional product on the market." And then I asked the director for that product, "What's the tech stack runway? Do we have enough lifespan to support this, for an unknown number of years?" He went back and had some conversations, and he said, "Oh yeah, no, they're investing in upgrading it, right? They see no end of life anytime soon." I was like, why are we going to rebuild this? I mentioned it to my boss. Fortunately, my boss was one of these people who turns like immediately. And he's like, yeah, we're not rebuilding it. And he backed me up. But it was the rest of the executive team that needed to be convinced. Fortunately, my boss also, had engineering reporting to him. So it was sort of an easy conversation. Um, so that I think, sort of providing the information, I think was the biggest piece of it. Put those two key pieces of information, evaluated to be the most fully functional on the market, plenty of runway. Why would we try to rebuild this? It's like, let's put our money elsewhere. Yeah.
You've identified what value are you bringing to the business and to the users, and there was going to be basically negative value to both.
Yeah, exactly. And there's lots more to that story, but that's sort of like the nutshell of it. Yeah.
But to your own point, diplomacy, very important. And I don't like saying this anymore because I keep hearing it, but bringing the data, I almost like you brought the voice. You brought the voice.
Right. It's like I think there's, having, occasionally you work with people who are, great at other aspects of their job, but not necessarily great at distilling lots and lots of data into information. And I think it's the realization of this is the thing that they need to hear, or these are the two pieces of information that they didn't have, that they should have to help them see, my point of view, rather than, a 30-page deck that has tables and tables and tables. Right? It's like, no, like that's a very short email, right? Or a Slack message.
I do find when I interact with people who are earlier in their career versus leaders, and it might be because leaders are always asking to distill this information, but I tend to find that people who are more successful in their careers are very good at what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And when I interact with people who I asked them a question and instead they gave me a long story.
Yeah.
They're not going to be, in general, I mean, I'm generalizing here, as successful as those who learn to do exactly what you were saying.
Yeah. That's that third point, right, that I interviewed for that I didn't actually get to, is, as I'm listening to answers to the questions that I asked, those two behavioral interview questions, things that I'm listening for are, did you answer my question? And was it clear and concise? Right? Did we stay within the 45 minutes that I usually allot for the interview, or did the story kind of like, did I have to really dig for your answer, or did it come out clearly? And then was I engaged? Right? Did you tell me a clear story with a through line, and did I enjoy hearing about it? Right? And did I walk away with, oh, that's kind of an interesting, like jewel that you polished and showed me, right?
I think what you're talking about here is that we do live in story, and that's why storytelling is so powerful. And so I think interviews in general, just as we're talking right now, it's really about stories. That's why we call it product side stories. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. And with that, I do want to ask you if you have a piece of advice, given your career and your experience, for let's say people who are currently in the director level, so product managers who've already managed others, but are interested in taking the next step in their career and getting a VP role. Do you have any advice to share about what they could do to set themselves up for success?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, coaching for your team. You want to be the person who, product managers are extremely competent, and you want to be the kind of person who lets them be good at their job. And, I run my one-to-ones mainly as, come to me, please don't bring me problems. Instead, bring me, here's a problem, here's the solution I think I want to follow. Can we talk through, is this good? How could it be better? Sort of along the lines of completed work product. It's a philosophy from a Canadian general. Coaching as well, being specific and clear about what it is that you need somebody to change. Advice like, you aren't strategic, not helpful. Instead, in meetings, I noticed that you do X. Could you please try doing Y instead? That kind of feedback for your team and helping them change is really crucial as you move into the leadership ranks, and being able to manage experts the way that experts like to be managed. I think also like that diplomacy leading up is also really important. Exactly what we were just talking about. The further you go, the shorter time you have, and the more complex and the more nuanced the situations are, so that ability to distill the information down into here's the information, and also here's my opinion about where we should be going, right? I forget who said it, but recently, it's like you never want to walk into an executive meeting and not have an opinion, right? You should be open to having your mind changed, but be ready with, this is what I think we should do. I've heard X and Y and Z, and here's the direction that I'm going to propose.
Yeah, again, I feel like I can agree with you all day. And but it is true, especially the last point. As a VP of product, I think you get to see much more of the bigger picture. And so I love what you said about coaching, because at that level, you're doing a lot more of that leading and coaching others, because you're not so much doing the work yourself. You're not supposed to. I mean, there's probably some still, but you have more of a bigger picture, and you also have that voice and credibility in your organization, and your team kind of relies on you to do that diplomacy. It's important to practice it earlier as a product manager, but they do look to you to do that because you have more, political capital in the company. You have more of the credibility.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Anna, I so enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. How can people follow you after they hear this recording?
Oh, Irina, it's just been a delight. A really enjoyable conversation. Thank you. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me Ann Pelz-Neckchea. It's excellent. Yeah.
Wonderful. And thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of Product Side Stories. I hope today's insights inspire you and propel your product journey forward. Remember, every challenge is a lesson waiting to be learned. Visit us at productside.com for more free resources, including webinars, templates, playbooks, and other product wisdom repackaged for you. I'm Rena Lexon, and until next time, keep innovating, keep leading, and keep creating stories worth sharing.